want to have a photo of all of us between the session, which number is it tomorrow? 9, and before lunch. Is it correct, Angeliki?
Yes, and let's have one more photo tonight because Barbara, she will be absent tomorrow.
Oh, right.
So to include her in our photo. No, it's better since you're here. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's start because we are already
Yes.
late.
So, welcome to the last session of today. I'd like to introduce myself in one word. My name is Dietrich Olms from Georg Olms Verlag in Germany, and we are pleased to publish this series or this conference, Studies on Ibadism and Oman. And yes, now I want to open this session, and I hope that we are not too exhausted to follow up the second part of the identity of Ibadism, which is very interesting, I think, and we would like to listen to the contribution by Mohsen Al-Kindi, the identity and intercommunication referential in the modern Omani poetry. Mohsen Al-Kindi is at the Sultan Qaboos University in Muscat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. هذه ورقة عملناها من فترة حول موضوع أثيري ومهم ويطرح قضايا فكرية تصل بطروحات الشعر العماني الحديث، وربما هذه الأطروحة استهوتني منذ أمد بعيد، ويعني استطعت أستنبط منها بما يتلائم مع هذه الندوة المهمة. عنوان المداخلة هو الهوية الإباضية ومرجعيات التواصل وتجربياتها في الشعر العماني الحديث. كما تابعها السيد الرئيس الجلسة The Ibadi Identity and Intercommunication in the Modern Omani Poetry. هذه الورقة تقع في 50 ورقة، صفحة سوف أختصرها بما يتلائم الوقت المتاح، وفيها تناولت عناوين يعني إطارية تتصل بمرجعيات التواصل أولا، ودرس فيها المرجعية اللغوية، ودرس أيضا المرجعية العقلية، وانتهيت إلى المرجعية السياسية. ثم تناولت بعد ذلك مصادر التواصل عبر الرحلات والتعليم والبعثات الدراسية والطباعة والصحة. ثم تناولت في الفصل الثالث أعلام التواصل الذين لهم أثر كبير، وحددت هناك عدة معطيات وشروط من هو العالم الذي تقع فيه الدراسة. فركزت على أمور الإنساني، شخصية مهمة في عقيدة الإباضية، ثم أيضا درس سليمان المارون وهو أحد الإباضيين الذين تعلمهم وقدم إلى عمان، وكان له حضور وكان له تأثير في هذا التواصل بين إباضية المشرق وإباضية المغرب. ثم أيضا تناولت شخصية أبي إسحاق إبراهيم الفيش ودوره في هذا التواصل أيضا، وانتهيت يعني إلى الشاعر الأشهر أكثر ظهورا في يعني مدون الشعرية العمانية الحديثة، هو المسلم البحداني والمسلم البحداني الرواحي عليه. وانتهيت في الفصل الثالث حول حضور التواصل وتجلياته، وعلى حول تجليات هذا التواصل يعني في الشعر وفي الأديان الإقليمية، مركزا على حضور الجزائر الشعر العماني الحديث، وحضور المغرب الشعر العماني الحديث، وحضور تونس، وحضور ليبيا، وكلها تمثل دائرة يعني قطرها مركزها هو العقيدة الإباضية، وحوارها هو التواصل وأشكال الهوية التي ترجمتها هذه الأدبيات المختلفة عبر الشعر. في البداية يعني وبشكل منهجي أحدد ما هو مفهوم الهوية الذي ارتأيته، وأقصد به تحديدا ذلك التفاعل الحميمي الخالص القائم بين الإنسان الشاعر، أقصد هنا أركز على الإنسان الشاعر المبدع وبيئته وتاريخه وثقافته، إضافة إلى إعلان هذا الإنسان عن بقائه وسط ما يحيط به من ظروف تميزه عن غيره. إنها محصلة الرغبة الإنسانية الجامحة للتفاعل مع الحياة، فالشاعر هو شاعر حياة، ومن فضاءات اختلافها بألفة الوجود، وهي مقام آخر ضمن جملة التفاصيل التي يرسمها الشاعر دائما في جسد الأشياء الخارجية لتحقق مآرب أحلامه ورؤاه، ولتدخل بشكل كبير ومركزي في تشكيل إبداعه، أي تشكيل قصيدته التي يقدمها للمتلقي. إنها بشكل عام الانتماء إلى عالم الكون والوجود بحس عقدي. ربما يكون هذا الحس العقدي كما تعلمون ينتمي إلى أي من العقائد المختلفة السنية العقدية، ولكن هنا تركيز على العقيدة الإباضية لتحقيق غايات ومقاصد أبرزها حضورا وغاية العقدية الصرفة التي تؤكد مدى حضور يعني حضور هذا الشاعر أو العقيدة الإباضية في بنية القصيدة أو في موضوعات القصيدة، وفي أيضا يعني بعض البناء الموضوعية المتأصلة ضمن هذه المكونات. من هنا فإن محاولة الكشف عن الهوية الإباضية وأشكال التواصل الشعري بين أقطاب المؤسسة الإباضية الواحدة تؤول بشكل أو بآخر إلى محاولة بيان السيرة الحضارية التي تربط أطرافها حاضرا أو غائبا بكافة مصادرها ومكوناتها ومرجعيتها سواء على المستوى المحلي أو العربي أو الإسلامي. واكتشاف هذه الهوية يعني اكتشاف التميز والمغايرة الشخصية الإباضية التي لو فكر فيها التعبير باستدخال مهمها الإنسانية كونها عامة وليست مهمة خاصة. في هذه المساحة الحرة من التناول البحثي تنجلي كواشف التجربة الإباضية عامة والشعبية خاصة لما تقدمه من علاقات أزلية مع واقعها التي تقوم عليه، خاصة بما عرفنا أن هذا الواقع بات ممتدا على فضاءات واسعة يجعل من أغلب الشعراء العقيدة الإباضية شعراء إصلاحيين تنويريين، وهنا أغلب من حكاية الله كما أشرت إلى الأسماء التي ذكرتها سواء نور الدين السالم أو مسلم أو سلسلة القراء يعني الشاعر القاضي والشاعر الفقيه والشاعر المؤرخ والشاعر المعلم، وهذه الأنماط الشخصية التي تأصلت فيما بعد في الأدب العماني الشعر العماني عبر مركزية الخطاب منبثق أساسا من أطروحات طبعا المسلم البهلاني، وقبله أيضا المحقق سعيد بن خلفان الخليلي، وقبله أشكال يعني أنماط الشخصيات التنويرية التي حضرت غالبا ويعني حاضرة وغالبا في مدونة الشعر العماني الحديث. أقول أن هؤلاء الشعراء وظفوا جل إبداعهم نحو الواقع الإباضي بكافة تراصاتها المختلفة، أدبية كانت ثقافية عامة، وقدموا بذلك رسالة مهمة إلى المجتمع هي يعني لا أبالغ يعني من القول بأن أحد الباحثين العمانيين يعني قدم للثقافة العمانية معجما سماه معجم الشعراء الإباضيين في المشرق على نظير الشعراء الإباضيين في المغرب. هذا التنظير الذي أطر به عنوان معجمة يحيل دائرة هذه الرسالة بما تعني من انتقاء وبما تعني من أطروحات تتصل بالعقيدة الإباضية في فلسفتها وفي فكرها الدقيق. على كل حال ما أقصده بالحضور أيضا ذلك التواصل التأثيري الذي ينطلق من تكون العقيدة الإباضية ويرتبط بمؤثراتها وينفتح على واقع الإبداع فيها عبر خواص العلاقات والمواقف ليتشكل فيما بعد باسم يعني إذا صح التعبير اصطلاحا تجوزا للشعر الإباضي وفق المحددات التي ربما يسمع النقاد. وهنا أذكر البحث الأكاديمي المميز الذي قدمه الدكتور محمد السليمي حينما يعني درس العقيدة أو تجليات الشعر العماني، تجليات العقيدة الإباضية للشعر العماني، معتمدا على المنجز البحثي السابق الذي قدمه الفقهاء وقدمه الأكاديميون في الجزائر وغيره، وهي يعني روح أكاديمية جدا مهمة في هذا الخطاب الشعبي، في هذا الخطاب الحضاري الدقيق. تأسيسا على المنطق من حول ظاهرة التواصل والحضور، تجمع كما تعلمون أدبيات. هذه الأدبيات هي مكمن العلاقات الحضارية الآن بين عمان وسائر دول العالم الإسلامي، لأن هذه العلاقات انطلقت من الوطن عمان إلى الآخر العربي والإسلامي، وشكلت خطابا فارق أشكال الخطابات القومية اللاحقة، وقدم ظواهر كثيرة ربما يعني، وعلاقات أيضا أحيانا متنافرة وأحيانا متآلفة مع شدة الحكم ومع السلط السياسية ذلك الزمن بعيد، إلى أن وجدت المؤسسة الواحدة الحاكمة الآن بحساب تنويري منفتح وبأشكال التسامح الديني الذي ظهرت عليه من أول يوم في عمان منذ قدوم صاحب الجلالة في 1970. فنشأت علاقات يعني بين الدولة والغرب وبين الدولة والدولة على اعتبار، وبين الدولة والمؤسسات القديمة التي كانت تعرفونها بعمان، مؤسسة الإمامة، وقبلها أيضا حتى المؤسسات السياسية الكبيرة في الجبهات جبهة التحرير وغيرها يعني في فترة معينة، ولكن وإن ابتعدت الأخيرة التي عن هذا الموزع يعني عقدي واضح، ولكن مؤسسة الإمامة هي في قلب يعني في صلب عملية التواصل الحضاري، خاصة أنها ربطت يعني أواصر التلاحم الحضاري بين عمان وبين سائر يعني المؤسسات الإباضية المختلفة، وبالذات في الجزائر وفي تونس وفي يعني الجبل الغربي في مصر وغيرها. في هذا البحث الذي سوف أتجاوزه بكثير من السرعة، أيضا المرجعية التي أحالت إلى المرجعية الإباضية، المرجعية المحلية إلى الجوانب أشكال التواصل في ما يسمى بالمرجعية اللغوية والمرجعية العقلية والمرجعية السياسية، وأشكال الانزياحات التي خرجت من هذا التأثر من العقيدة الإباضية وأسقطت على المؤلفات الفكرية التي يعني ظهرت في الأدب، وأيضا استقى بعض الشعراء الفقهاء بعض يعني صورهم وتخيلاتهم من فلسفة العقيدة الإباضية بشكل عام. هنا يعني سوف أقدم نموذج جدا مهم في هذا السياق، وهو نموذج تجاوز حوالي 30 صفحة من هذا البحث يعني حمل الوقت، وركز على الشخصية الأهم، الشخصية الشاعرة في هذا المقام، وهو شخصية أبي مسلم ناصر المدين الرواحي، وهي شخصية جدا مؤثرة في يعني الفكر الإباضي العماني، واعتمدت على فكرة التواصل، اعتمد فكرة التواصل في الخطاب الشعري على 4 عوامل أساسية. هي أن المرجعيات هي ليست مجرد انعكاس فني للموضوعات السياسية والاجتماعية والاقتصادية وغيرها، وإنما هي انعكاس موضوعي لها، وعلى ذلك مفهوم المرجعيات يتحدث بكونه علاقة بين سائر العلاقات وما تشير إليه، وأنها تحيل إلى موضوعات خارجة عن اللغة وداخلة في المضمون الفكري، يعني أقصد خارجة عن اللغة ليست عن اللغة العربية، ولكن خارجة عن السياق الموضوعي الذي أراد أن يقدمه. وسوف أقرأ بعد قليل نص يعني يحيل إلى شخصية الهوية الإباضية كما يراها المسلم في شعره. العامل الثاني نشر المسلم الحق بنوعية المرجعيات وأشكال المفاهيم المتعلقة باعتبارها حركة التغيير البنائي بالمجتمع العماني، إبان ظهور هذا الشاعر في محاولة الاهتداء إلى كيفية تولدها وتطورها على نحو يجعل من تجربته الشعرية عمقا سوسيولوجيا اجتماعيا لا يمكن بأي حال من الأحوال أن تكون خارجة عنه، وأعني بذلك يعني القصيدة الشهيرة قصيدة النونية التي أكدت على المفهوم السوسيولوجي الاجتماعي المركب التي تنتمي إليه الشخصية العمانية، وهي الشخصية القبلية، لتتبعها يعني بشيء من الدقة والتفصيل مناصرة لمؤسسة الإمامة التي كانت قائمة تلك الفترة، وهو يدعم هذه الفكرة بشكل مركزي مباشر. الشاعر إذن في هذا المقام ومن بيئته ونتائج اتباعها، وبذلك يعني وهذه الفكرة المركزية يعني تلعب دور المفتاح السحري بأقفاله المستعصية التي تعرف طبعا المسلم مثل نيقة قدرته ومعجمه اللغوي الخاص وصوره الخلاقة تجعل منه يعني هذا الشاعر الأهم في سياق الشعر المالوي الذي انبثقت منه مدرسة، وكان أن أقول تجوزا مدرسة إضافية عمانية في المسلمين التي لها ارتداداتها في عمان، وربما نعمل أن تكون لها ارتداداتها أيضا في المغرب العربي على اعتبار أن التأثر والتأثير والتواصل يعني والعلاقات كانت قائمة. العمل الثالث أن الشعر المسلم يظهر حالة الارتباط الوثيق بين مكونات الخطاب الديني ونقد الواقع، وهو فعلى الرغم أن قصائد هذا الخطاب تتكون من أذكار وابتهالات ومدائح نبوية، إلا أنها ليست بحال من الأحوال من ذلك النوع الهروبي من الواقع، ولكن ويستمسك بحبال الواقع لا يخرج عنه، ويقدم طموحته الإباضية الفكرية الوطنية من خلال يعني تمسك بالثوابت الكبرى الشخصية الإباضية ثم الشخصية الرومانية في الذهنية. بمسلم في سواء في قصائدهم المسمى الروانية أو في قبل القرآن أو يعني هذه القصائد الوجودية أو القصائد اللامعة التي تحفظها يعني أجيال جيل بعد جيل، ويعني تكاد أهم في سياق يعني هذا التشكل للخطاب الإباضي. ربما من هذا المقطع المهم من قصيدته الأولى وهي البحر الطويل كما تعلمون، جزا الله أهل النهروان وضاءة ومن فوق مرضات الإله الجور كما جاهدوا في الله حق جهاده. هنا هو يستحضر كما تعلمون الشراء هي الطب الفكرة الإباضية الدقيقة، وقاموا بما يرضي وفيه يغيروا وماتوا كراما قانتين بهم وكلهم على الموت صبار هناك شكور سرات لا يخط غبارهم وإن أبلجت فوق الأمور نور. إذا انتهكت من دين الإسلام حرمة فليس لهم عيش هناك قرير ندين بوجه الله طوعا بحبهم وما شنأنا المحبين نظير نفوسهم حيث وجه ربهم قرابين منهم قدمت ونذور. هذه القصيدة الرائعة مهمة بفكرة يعني الهوية والفكرة الإباضية، يعني يركز الشاعر بشكل دقيق على المفاهيم الإباضية التي يعني يؤمن بها ويعني تكاد هيبة وتسأل أي حد يعني قولنا من كل مع المشايخ بأنها قداسة ومن يعني شيء من المحرمات أو الخروج على شيء من المحرمات أو الكبائر الكبرى. في هذا المقطع يذكر الشاعر بأهل النهروان ويمدحهم بما نظر فيه من الحق والإيمان حتى قضي عليهم، ويستمد معجبهم من النصوص والأصول الدينية مثل جزا الله مرضات الله الجوع جهاد قانتين تو وجه ربهم الموحدين. فالمعجم كله دين، وقد وظفه الشاعر بإبراز أهل النهروان ويعني شراء يعني يؤكد على هذا القص، وهم شروا الموت بالحياة، ومن شروا الموت بالحياة جهادا في سبيله ما رأوه حقا ولم يروا في ذلك لو اعتداء يخلصوا بوجه ربهم. والشاعر هنا من أجل أن بذلك يدين بهم ليس من أجلهم وإنما من أجل الله سبحانه وتعالى. ونحن نرى أن المدح الديني ليس فقط إحياء لذكر أهل النهروان، وإنما لأن ذكرهم ذكر الحسن يمثل وجهة نظر البالغ. الشاعر في هذه الأبيات يقدم صورة واضحة يفتخر بها بالشخصية الإباضية واجتماعاتها وجذورها، وطبعا التي ترتبط بأسلافه أهل النهروان، وهم في مقامهم مجاهدون صابرون عابدون مرحون زهاد. وهذه الصفات تعمق إحساسه بالانتماء وتؤثر الشخصية الهوية يعني العقدية للشخصية الإباضية في أدق تفاصيلها. إذا بمثل هذا الخطاب يعني مبجل، أسميه مبجل على اعتبار أنه فخر واعتبار أنه يحيل إلى الهوية في أدق تفاصيلها. الكثير من قصائد لمسلم وغيره وينسحب عليه الكثير من قصائد القرآن والمؤرخين بالذات يعني فترة الخمسينيات من فترة العشرينيات وحتى الربع الأول وحتى الربع الأخير من القرن العشرين تقريبا كل الشعراء الفقهاء والقضاة أصحاب الدليل نظموا القصيدة النزول المقفى يعني تتلمذوا على المسلم وخرجوا من عباءته على قلب الحس الديني الواضح الدقيق. هناك انتهي في نهاية هذا البحث، وطبعا أنا طليت هذا البحث على أشكال التواصل في الصحافة التي تعلمونها وقدمتها من قبل في كتابي صحافة من المهاجر، وفي أيضا ذلك التواصل بالتعليم اللي يعني جاءوا حملة العلم وغيرهم من الأفواج التي أتت بعدهم، ثم وصولا حتى بنهاية الحضور العماني العقدي الإباضي في وادي ميزان اللي حضور في مدارس التعليم الأولى في الستينيات في أواخر الستينيات أشرت إليهم، وأيضا في حضور الباروني يعني في عمان بأكثر من 50 قصيدة في زيارتي أو في وجودي في عمان نظمها الشعراء العمانيين في تلك الفترة. هنا لدي سرد كبير بأسماء هذه الشعراء، وقد أيضا تناولها بحث قمري في أكثر من كتاب ربما الشيباني نتحدث عنها، وأيضا الدكتور سعيد الهاشمي أيضا تناولها في يعني هذه القصائد في يعني ميثاقا، وأيضا الكتاب للسيد حاتم الطائي طلع يعني فترة كانت في كل القصائد التي كتبت في الباروني أثناء رحلته إلى عمان، وكلها تحيل بشكل أو بآخر اتباع فكرة العقيدة الإباضية في أشكال الموضوع في أشكال التعبير، وإن كانت وحدة الخطاب العربي بأدق تفاصيله كانت حاضرة. أنتهي إلى القول بأن يعني الشخصية الإباضية رسمت ملامحها في النص الشعري العماني التقليدي النزول المقفى، واستلهم الشعراء العمانيون هذه الأطروحات الفكرية الإباضية المحلية، وفرضت هذه الظاهرة ظاهرة التواصل والحضور الإباضي منطلقا يحيل إلى المرجعيات المؤسسة لها، سواء ما يخص بالعقيدة الإباضية أو ما يخص يعني أشكال التواصل الأخرى المنتقل منها. تمكنت الشخصية الإباضية من حسها العقدي المنتقل وفكرها الديني المستمر من خلال توظيفها للتراث من التأكيد على الهوية الإسلامية والانفتاح على المكونات العربية، وتجلى ذلك الاتكائه على التراث العريق بخاصة الرموز والأحداث والتاريخ والقيم والعادات والتقاليد والموروث الشعبي، وحرص على توظيف العملية بما يخدم النص الفكري عامة والشعري خاصة. كان لهذا في توظيف الشاعر العماني المجدد أيضا للتراث ببعده به دورا في التأكيد على الاتساق بالهوية والكيان، وقد الحديث عنه من خلال طقوسها ومناخاتها وتاريخها وقلاعها وصحرائها وأشجارها وكثبانها وجبالها ونخيلها وواحاتها وأكبادها ضربا من ضروب الانتماء التي حرص عليها الشاعر ووجه رسالته العقلية أحيانا منها ويعني ذلك ما استطيع القول في هذه المجال الخاطئة، مع أن البحث طبعا يعني يحيل إلى كل هذه المكونات عند الشيخ طريش وعند نور الدين سالم وعند الباروني وعند ابن مسلم وتلاميذ ابن مسلم في أقصى عمان، يعني في عمان من أقصاها إلى أقصاها. أشكر لكم وجزاكم الله خير، واستمع البادر بعدم تمكني من الحديث بغير
Thank you very much for giving us an idea of the Ibadi identity by referring to Omani poetry. I would like to ask Barbara Michalak-Mikulska now to contribute to this session by talking about identity in literary output and cultural life in Oman.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to Sheikh Abdullah Salami and to Dr. Abdurrahman Salami. And I would like to thank for organizing this conference to thank you, and to our colleague, Professor Angelique Ziaka, who put great effort to contact us. Thank you. After such a long day, we are all tired, so I will try to make my short story long. No, my short. Sorry. So, our present idea of identity is rather complicated. Everyone knows how to use the word properly in everyday discourse. It proves quite difficult to give a short and adequate summary statement that captures the range of its present meaning. So I quote, identity is used to describe the way individuals and groups define themselves and are defined by others on the basis of ethnicity, religion, language, and culture. A major element of identity is one's heritage and behavioral patterns that are currently rooted. Culture, therefore, is a glue thanks to which we can maintain our own identity. It ensures internal consistency and a sense of unity with members of a given national or cultural areas. Identity is a set of different elements. It includes issues concerning religion, history, customs, and language. As far as Omani identity is concerned, we observed it in the early 20th century with the fall of Ottoman Empire. It was represented by Abu Muslim al-Bahlani, while establishing imama by Imam Salim Rashid al-Kharousi. His perspective started with tribal unification under the leadership of Nur ad-Din al-Salimi. He tried to identify all Omani tribes, regardless of their differences, genealogy, and geographical location. Because Professor Muhsin talked a lot about Muslim al-Bahlani, so I will just make a few remarks. Muslim al-Bahlani is an outstanding figure in the pantheon of Omani poets, because many Omanis identify with his poetry and thoughts. His voice was wide because he came from East Africa to Oman, and it gives impression of the Omanis both sides of the Indian Ocean. Abu Muslim's poetic talent had produced a large number of poems. It's more than 25, I think, long poems and many short ones. He finds power with his poetry and thoughts. He finds power in Almighty God and creates his own language through references to spiritual experiences and a very close and direct relationship with God. Thus, some of his pieces have features of prayer and contemplation, which has an evident influence on the shape of literary composition. Abu Muslim begins his poetry from the phrase which repeats throughout. For example, he's God, in the name of God. The anaphor not only gives the poem its rhyme and makes it more expressive, but it also brings all Omanis together. They identify themselves with his words. Abu Muslim, in his poetry, reflects social and political matters. He wanted to establish links between elements of the religious discourse and style of modern language. His poetry is searching for a concept which is related to the fact of transformation of the Omani society. So this is, I make it short while I see the long speech about Abu Muslim al-Bahlani. The second generation come at the end of the Imama, at the end of 50s, represented by many important figures. Among them, Abu Salam al-Kindi, Abdullah Khalili, Sulaiman al-Salimi. They all give historical description of revival of the nation and identity. In the end of the 60s, 20th century, was the end of Abu Said state in East Africa. It affects Omanis in their diaspora in the Arab world, especially Gulf. Abdullah Tai reflected it in his literary works. He spent many decades in Khalij, so when he finally came back, he felt alienated. He is the author of novels Ash-Shira al-Kabir or Malikat Jabal al-Akhbar. Abdullah Tai, in his novel Ash-Shira al-Kabir, shows the perspective of Khaliji identity through Oman. He writes about Imam bin Sultan Ya'rubi, who sent ship from Basra to Oman to bring people to fight Portuguese in 17th century. He shows the loyalty of Arab tribe from the Gulf. Then he is the author of many poems like Al-Fajr al-Zahir, Midan Ayyuha al-Kabil, Al-Muhattam, poem Naim al-Khalij. Abdullah Tai was the first who looked for national identity of the Gulf. The poem has a qafila talking about Renaissance in Oman after gaining power by Sultan Qaboos. Abdullah Tai tried to introduce Oman and Gulf with its literature. He wanted to show Gulf perspective and that Gulf is Arab land, not Persian. He was proud of being Omani. He wrote it in many critical books, Al-Adab al-Muasir fi al-Khalij al-Arabi, or Dirasat al-Khalij al-Arabi, and Shuara al-Muasirun, where he selected the most important figures and poets from Gulf in 60s. The next generation appeared after Renaissance in 1970. It shows Omani's awareness of consciousness of their identity. New names appear, for example, Abu Surur Hamid bin Abdullah bin Hamid al-Jamai from Samail, where he grew up and studied in Quranic school. He is the author of Rawdat al-Bab, which is a smooth combination within one work of love and patriotic lyricism. The poet subsequently described Samail, which is for him the most beautiful place. He says that Samail caused Oman to be great and glorious, for it produced many exceptional citizens. All the inhabitants of Samail believe in God and obey Him. Also, he devoted many of his poems to the history of Oman, for example, Oman al-Madi, Majid Oman. The poet presents here the history of his country over the course of the centuries, starting from ancient history through the adoption of Islam up until the present day. He does not give historical facts, which after all is not the poet's job, but he gives the reader a sketch of the most important historical events to help understanding their background. Then new names appears in the 90s who has different approach to identity. They already live in a peaceful, beautiful country. They write about, like Abu Surur, they write about their villages, about their towns they come from. We observe a different level of consciousness and language. We have such a name like Said al-Saqlawi, Saib al-Rahabi, Hassan Matrushi, and others. And we observe different expressions, description, modern language, concentrating of different subjects like traveling, love, poetry, descriptions of nature, and current events. The same topics as in modern poetry, we can also observe in the prose, modern prose writing. So I would like to mention some topics which are undertaken in prose forms. The Omani prose has a short story in relation to poetry. This literary form was linked by young Omani writers of the 80s, for according to them it was to be the short story itself that was to give a current description of social, political, and cultural situation in Oman, which was changing following the taking of power in 1970 by His Majesty Sultan Qaboos. The national identification of Omanis with Oman became one of the basic aims. So we have many new names, Abdullah Balushi, Salim Al-Humaydi, Numair Al-Said, Badri Al-Shahri, and others. Now I would like to present just shortly a few topics about prose. So they love Oman. They identify themselves with Oman. For example, Khalid Al-Farisi in his story Maskat Turani is proud of being Omani. He identifies himself with everything that reminds him of his native country and town. He describes numerous districts of Muscat and author himself says that, I quote, "It is the song of an Omani to his beloved country." Of course, Omanis often within the pages of their modern literature return to their own history. In this way, the short story lends itself to the formation of historical consciousness. The facts contained in them create an image of society. They stress the role of the individual. So, for example, Hamad Rashid bin Rashid, in his short story Azam, showing the way how main hero fight with Portuguese. Because this topic is going to be undertaken by Dr. Hilal, so I will also try to escape this question because I don't know what kind of stories you prepare. Another theme is identity paradigm which was being put to the test through globalization. To be global doesn't mean to lose identity but get another identity as global citizens based on their own nationality. Being globalized means that you accept all facts with global mind and perspective. So such a identification we can observe in Al-Kalbani's short story Al-Awda. It shows how Omanis are open. This subject, the main hero is a student in European country, and this subject belongs to the most fundamental within contemporary Arabic literature, examples of which are Tawfiq al-Hakim's The Bird from East or Rifat Tahtawi, A Description of Paris. The author presents here how the main hero accepts new country, new civilization, and how he's doing good in acceptance it. But after years, he decides to return. So the author says, Ahmed returned, he returned to his homeland, he returned to his family, to his countrymen, to God. He shows the nature and finally the decision made when he chose his identification. Also, Omanis identify themselves with their environment, which is sea, desert, palms. So it's a very cute story by Hamad Rashid bin Rashid al-Nakhla al-Saghira. And Hamad describes the cultivation of palms and their significance for the country for which they constitute richness. It shows how the palms are rooted in Oman's mentality. Omani writers, through a modern look at the past, yearn to enrich national culture, for revitalizing history, is for them reaching for one's own roots. Different events unite the similarity of human attitudes. They are equally interested in religious problems, the mutual influence of different cultures, the relations between the individual and society at various times. They experience and view historical facts from various sides, making use of freedom in the expressing of thoughts and views. Omani writers and poets undertake an emotional form of accounting with the past in their works. Now I would like to say a few words about cultural life in Oman, because it plays a very important role in developing identity. So many clubs were founded, like Al-Muntada Al-Adabi, Al-Nadia Al-Thaqafi, Al-Markaz Al-Thaqafi, Al-Nadia Al-Watani Al-Thaqafi, and many, many others. So they organize conferences, literary activities. The members are university graduates, writers, poets, readers, people of art, and so on. They organize many conferences, for example, about cities like Dhofar, between the past and the present, then Sohar over the centuries, or about Niswa in its historical position. These conferences also helps to shape national identities. As everywhere in the world, media and the press played a very important role in the development of contemporary Omani literature and culture. Here I would like to mention the cultural and literary quarterly Niswa magazine, which appeared in 1994. The editor-in-chief is Omani poet Saiba Rahbi, and Nizwa magazine is considered to be one of the best journals in the Arab world. Many young Omanis write for it. Outstanding figures from Arab literary and cultural life are often invited to contribute. There's room for literature, culture, philosophy, artistic theme, criticism, and so on. So, to sum up, I did it short. I would like to emphasize that literature played an important role in showing identity of Omanis. They all share their love for Oman. They write poems and prose dedicated to their beautiful homeland because they all share the same feelings, language, religion, and habits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara, for your most valuable contribution to this session and to keep a long story short. And it was most interesting to listen to the identity by language and literature and culture. So it was very, very interesting. So now I have the pleasure to announce Hilal Al-Hajiri with his paper Portuguese Colonization in Omani Literature, the Image of National Identity and Resistance.
Thank you very much. The story of the Portuguese colonization of Oman is a long story, but I will try to cut it short. And then I will examine some verses left from that period, representing the colonialism. And finally, I will give a quick review of one of the contemporary literary works devoted to the Portuguese colonization of Oman, written by the permanent Omani writer Abdul Tai. It has been mentioned by Mr. Barbara, Al-Shira' al-Kabir, or the Big Sale. So let me introduce my topic by the story of the Portuguese colonization of Oman. It was anyway on 10th August 1507, the Portuguese fleet headed under the command of the Albuquerque to Oman, passing the island of Kuria and Masira. They proceeded to Ras al-Had, where they burnt about 40 boats belonging to local fishermen before moving on to the city of Talhat, where the population surrendered when the fleet arrived due to their previous show of strength on Oman's coast. On 22nd August, Albuquerque sailed from Talhat to Khrayat, where he encountered the resistance of two garrisons. Heavy and prolonged fighting broke out, with the people of Khrayat eventually being forced to vacate their positions. The Portuguese indiscriminately slaughtered every man, woman, and a child they could find, cutting off the ears and noses of prisoners in revenge, before looting, plundering, and burning the town and capturing a quantity of weapons. Before leaving Khrayat for Muscat, they also burned 38 vessels anchored in the harbor. it was a brutal massacre. Albuquerque's second goal was Muscat, which he founded fortified. The people had most likely heard of the terror that had descended upon their brothers in Qurayat, and were undecided whether to resist or reluctantly surrender. Albuquerque decided to attack and destroy the city, resulting in the destruction of fortifications. Despite the valor and resistance shown by the inhabitants in defending their city, a pitched battle was fought in the center with the Omani forces gradually being driven out and massacred by their oppressors. Albuquerque and his forces carried a cruel and savage massacre on the remaining civilians after gathering them in the city square, slaughtering any men, women, and children they encountered without discrimination. He then ordered the looting and burning of the city, allowing his soldiers to keep any stolen booty in compensation for the sacrifice they had made. Some inhabitants of the city fled to the highlands and raised a white flag as a sign of truce, unsuccessfully appealing to Albuquerque to stop killing women and children, although he agreed to evacuate the city for 10,000 ashrafis in gold to be paid immediately. The people of Muscat did not have that amount of money, so the Portuguese commander burned the city as well as 34 doors and other fishing boats. The mosque, which was described as beautiful, large, and built of decoratively engraved wood, also fell prey to the blazes. The Portuguese fleet continued its mission, practicing the same violence and cruelty, and occupying other Omani cities such as Sohar and Khor Fakkan on its way to Hormuz, which was undoubtedly the main target of the Portuguese, as it was very wealthy and strategically placed city in terms of trade between East and West at that time. So how the colonization has been perceived? The first phase of colonization, it is really surprising that Portuguese colonialism, despite its brutality, did not have much resonance in Omani poetry, particularly in its first phase. Omani poetry should have reflected the atrocities carried out by Albuquerque in Qurayat and Muscat, such as the burning of ships and buildings, and the slaughter of civilian men, women, and children. However, we don't find works from that period that reflect such acts, which were confirmed by Portuguese documents themselves. Instead, Omani poets indulged in erotic, eulogistic, and mystical poetry, as if the terror had never happened. The massacres committed by Albuquerque in Qurayat and Muscat shook the Portuguese themselves, but did not turn a hair on Omani poets at that time, despite the fact that they should have been capable of creating works in the face of tyranny by denouncing its aggression. The two most prominent poets who were aware of those events before the outbreak of the revolution and the war of liberation were Al-Qidawi, were Al-Lawah Al-Kharusi, who lived from 1489 to 1573, and Al-Qidawi, who lived between 1514 to 1575. The first poet, despite his Diwan, did not concern himself with the crimes against civilians in Hurriyat and Maskat at all, but immersed himself in his religious and sectarian poems. And it seems to me here that the trend of Sufism in the Arab heritage generally characterized by the reclusion in critical times. That was what is noticed by Zaki Mubarak, if you know him, a very famous Egyptian writer, who studied the poetry of a famous Sufi, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and his position regarding the crusade. Zaki Mubarak said, while Peter the Hermit was working day and night on preparing his speeches and composing his letters to urge Europeans to possess Muslim lands, Al-Ghazali was sunk in his solitude, devoted to his awrad, part of Quran, ignoring his duty in calling to jihad. So that's exactly what happened in Oman at that time. Al-Khidawi also ignored the issue of the Portuguese colonization and engaged in praising the kings and princes of a Nabhani dynasty, thus profiteering from his poetry to the level of servility. For example, he praises his king in these words: "If I were dim-sighted, I would not find but the soil of his shoes medicine for my eyes." In Arabic, إذا عشيت عيني فلست أرى لها سوى ترب عينيه دواء من العشي. When we read his huge diwan, we find it mostly dominated by eulogy without reference to the Portuguese and their violence in the coastal cities of Oman. What makes the silence of Oman's poets even stranger is that the Crusades were not chronologically far from the Portuguese colonization. The Crusade presence in Arabic poetry should have been an element of inspiration for Omani poets of the time, as imitation at least. Even before this Omani, even before this, Omani poetry was not devoid of the positions adopted by poets in situation of adversity and foreign aggression. For example, Omani literature includes a great poem written by a lady known as Zahra al-Soqotriya. Her real name was Fatima bint Hamad bint Khalfan al-Jahdamiya, from Samad al-Sham in the eastern area of Oman. Her father was probably a governor of Socotra island during the reign of Imam al-Salt ibn Malik al-Kharusi, and when the Ethiopians attacked the island and devastated its inhabitants, she sent a thunderous poem urging the Imam to rescue its people. The Imam responded positively to Zahra's poems, and sent his army to liberate the island in 237. Therefore, no matter how hard we try to justify the indifference of Omani poets to Albuquerque's horrors on Oman's coast, the absence of Portuguese colonization in their poems leaves a large question mark and deserves criticism. the stage of revolution and liberation. The election of Nasser bin Murshid al-Ya'rubi as Imam in 1624 saw a turning point in the history of Oman. And the country entered a glorious era, liberating Oman's coast from Portuguese dominance was the prime aim of Imam Nasser, who realized that achieving this target would be impossible without national unity among the tribes of Oman. Once the unification of the country was achieved, he dispatched his commander Mas'ud bin Ramadan, who led a large army to the Portuguese military base in Muscat at the end of 1632. The attack resulted in a large number of Portuguese being killed, and they were then forced to sign an agreement in which they pledged not to attack Omani ships. At the beginning of 1634, the Imam began an operation to release Khurayat and Sur from the Portuguese. He died in 1649 after achieving stability and accomplishing the most difficult task of driving out the invaders. Nasser bin Murshid al-Ya'rubi, military commander, Sultan bin Saif al-Ya'rubi, was elected in 1649. The reign of the new Imam saw the last stage of the liberating war and the expulsion of Portuguese from Oman. Immediately after his election, Sultan bin Saif solely commanded the military operation that ended gloriously within 9 months. At the beginning of 1650, a small Omani commando force carried out a sudden overnight attack, crossing the boundary and rushing to the streets of Muscat, striking down any invader they encountered. Portuguese morale collapsed entirely, and they hastily made for their ships, which were anchored in the harbor. But the Omanis pursued their enemies and succeeded in seizing their vessels. So the Portuguese, including the governor general at that time, did not survive long. At the time of the liberation of Muscat, another Omani force succeeded in capturing the fort of Khassab, and this signaled the end of Afonso Albuquerque and his countrymen in the Arabian Gulf. The beginning of liberation did not witness a supportive poetic stance. Since uniting the country under the flag of Imam Nasser bin Murshid during a quarter of a century, from 1625 until his death in 1649, no Omani poet who could stir up the people had emerged. No one who called for unity against the colonial power or traced the march of the revolution, speaking of its triumphs and celebrating freedom and independence. The only poet to whom we can refer during this period is Ibn Qaysar, Abdullah bin Khalfan, who wrote a long poem in which he traced historical events during the reign of Imam Nasser bin Murshid. It's more like a literary biography because its author documented the life of the Imam and the victories he achieved against his opponents from both the Omani tribes and the Portuguese. It is in this work that we come across the first mention of the Portuguese in Omani poetry under the description Christian or Nasara. The word comes up twice. The first in the poet's description of the Imam's victory over the Portuguese and their Persian supporters in Galfar, where he defeated them in 1633. Ibn Qaysar says, the Christian and their followers thought that they reached their dreams of defeating the Imam of the true religion. The Persian disappointed them, not only in this world, but also in the afterworld. The protector eradicated the Messiah's religion and revitalized Ahmad's faith. Okay? In the same year, after the liberation of Galfar, the Omani army made for Daba, where they confronted the Portuguese in a fierce battle. The Omani army prevailed and forced the occupiers to a truce. Here Ibn Qaysar again describes the Portuguese as Christian, but this time the image takes on another dimension, using the labels tyranny, aggression, and delusion. He says, describing the victories achieved by the Imam Nasr, Muslims armies return triumphantly to the noble Nizwa with everlasting honor and glory. They captured all the force of Sur and Qurayat. The delusion has been wiped off, and the tyrants' necks have obeyed. Daba has witnessed war that made its coastals vulnerable, in which was the victory of Islam over the aggressive Christian. The image of the Portuguese in Omani poetry thus began to take shape as being Christian, unjust, aggressors, and deceivers, but it takes on yet another dimension after the liberation of Muscat and the expulsion of Portuguese from Oman and East Africa, especially during the era of Imam Sultan bin Saif al-Ya'wi, who in 1650 led the Omani army in the battle to liberate Muscat. The last and most important stronghold of the occupiers in Oman. One of the poets who witnessed this was Khalaf ibn Sinan al-Ghafri. He died in 1711. It's said that he lived approximately 130 years, and therefore almost certainly witnessed the Arabi liberation of Oman and the defeat of the Portuguese in the Arabian Gulf, India and East Africa. One of Al-Ghafri's poems concerning the Portuguese is a laudatory work praising the Imam Sultan bin Saif in celebrating his triumphs over the Portuguese in Muscat, Dio in India, and Mombasa in Zanzibar in Africa. He says, with his brave heart, he led them against their will like animals led to the butchery. For Muscat, they sacrificed several countries that the priest's hearts would bleed for. So this is exactly what happened in the period of the colonization. It's only in the last quarter of the 20th century the Omani writers started to produce some literary works representing the colonialism or the Portuguese colonialism. Do I have time to review Abdullah Tayyib? Very shortly. Okay, just a quick review of the novel, because it is very important because it is devoted to is devoted to the Portuguese colonization. Set in the 16th century, Abdullah Tai's novel, The Big Sale, examines the formation of contemporary Omani identity as it developed in opposition to the Portuguese occupation. The Portuguese, this is what the novel tells us. The Portuguese invaded the Persian Gulf and its many coastal cities, reaching Aden, and as far the Bab al-Mandeb Strait between Yemen and the Horn of Africa. In their sweeping invasion of Arab lands, they occupied the island of Socotra in 1507, and from there they went to the rest of the cities of the Arabs. In the novel, Sheikh Hassan, one of the characters of the novel, flees the Portuguese to warn the people of Muscat of the fate that awaits them at the hand of the Portuguese. The people of Muscat decide that although their defeat is certain, they will resist the invading colonial power. Afonso de Albuquerque, commander of the Portuguese campaign, demands surrender, an annual tribute, and moreover, that the Omani workers prepare the Portuguese fleet for future wars. The terms of surrender are rejected, and Afonso de Albuquerque bombs the city, ordering that it be burned to the ground. The Portuguese colonizer appears in Attai's novel as an octopus, whose aim is to control trade and secure sea lanes. This octopus knows its purpose and knows well the ideas that pose a threat to its existence and control. Also, the colonizers appear as barbarians, advocates of disorder and infidelity in the novel, as brutal invaders killing women and children. The Portuguese burned 83 Arab ships. No one escaped from the Portuguese violence, not even the inmates of the prisons, whom they attacked by cutting their noses and ears, as Attai writes in his novel. Still, the Omani people are determined to resist. After years under Portuguese rule, on November 1521 in Muscat, the leader of the resistance declared a revolution, and that all Arab port cities will revolt against Portuguese domination. The Great Sale is not only a war story. Though war, conflict, and resistance are its essence, but the story of a society in the midst of that conflict. Abdullah Tai does not focus on an individual, but describes heroism equally but distributes heroism equally among all his characters. The entire Omani people participate in resisting the occupier. Everyone becomes the one who leads the resistance. Abdullah Tai also makes it clear that there is no room for individual heroism during a resistance movement, because it is by its nature a collective movement. The novel also includes the exciting tale of Chandra, an Indian girl from Banyan, living in Muscat. Chandra, the daughter of the merchant Narottam, plays a heroic role with a dramatic storyline, and when we get to the conclusion, she, along with all the figures in the novel are woven together, including those who have converted to Islam. Taken together, they are now Omani revolutionaries who are victorious as one. The reader cannot isolate the thread the writer weaves between Chandra from the personality of Imam Sultan bin Saif al-Ya'rabi. We cannot isolate these two threads from the threads of the simple characters in the novel either, such as Mr. Barham bin Ahmed al-Saqatri or Hamdan the poet, or the figure of Muhammad bin Hamad. They are all charged with the national interest. So, let's me conclude in these words. The Portuguese remained in Oman for a century and a half, until they were expelled in 1650. The occupation was brutal and barbaric. Cities were pillaged and burned, civilians massacred, harbors destroyed, even the prisoners had their noses and ears cut off. All these massacres happened in that area, in that era. Of course, the occupation was resisted by Omani, both in reality and literature. Nonetheless, the role of the later, the literature, was not as important as the former resistance in reality, because it didn't play a significant role in the resistance. As we have seen in the 16th and 17th century, the contribution of Omani poets to resistance fell very short of expectation. The very few poems left from that period did not construct a counter discourse that represented the Portuguese colonialism or barbarism in Oman at that time. Only, as I said, in the last quarter of the 20th century, we saw some Omani writers producing fictions reflecting that kind of colonialism. Thank you for your listening.
Yes, I also thank you very much for giving us an insight in that reaction of Omani authors on the cruelty and violence of the colonization era. And I forgot to mention that you come from the Ministry of Culture and Heritage in Muscat. And also I have to add that Professor Michalak Pekunska is the director of the Oriental Institute in Krakow. Just to introduce you now, Efim Rezvan from the Petersburg Kunstkamera Museum in Russia. Thank you. And sorry, I forgot to mention the Sindbad story as a part and projection of the Omani identity is your paper.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, let me express my sincere thanks for the possibility to see you all, for the organizers, both Omani and Japanese. I was really happy to see my old friends and to obtain you, and to listen to very important presentations, and I'm also happy to share with you the results of our work. The presentation I'm going to present to you is mostly based on the impressions we obtained during the expedition organized in March of this year through the territory of the Oman. And usually on such conferences I'm speaking as a specialist in Islamic studies, but for something like 20 years I'm working as the deputy director of one of the largest Russian Institute of Anthropology and Ethnography. That is why now I believe most part of my presentation will be connected to and will be influenced by my by the ideas, by the knowledge I obtained being on that position. To start with, I would like to start with two epigraphs. One is the words of Sheikh Abdullah, who was so kind as to grant us interview during our expedition. He said, "We believe that the committing of the citizens to their identity, a strong solidarity between them, has given the country unity which will continue in the future." And the second is are the words of Joseph Ernest Renan, "The nation is the result of the plebiscite of everyday life." The emergence of the term and identity is traditionally associated with the name of Erik Erikson, who defined it as a sense of personal sameness and historical continuity of personality. According to Erikson, the identity exists on two levels. The first level is the personal one. It involves the realization of the continuity of a person's existence in time and space. The second level, the social one, includes the perception that others recognize my oneness and continuity. While working in Oman, Kuwait, in Zanzibar, and Kerala, and Maldives, and Ceylon, and finally in Sumatra, I got learned much about the prototypes of the heroes of the tales about Sinbad, about the outstanding role of Muslim settlers played during the Islamic globalization, as well as the history of the cremation of the Indian Ocean by Europeans, about the maritime Silk Road, one of the most important channels for international information exchange and religious influence. Over millennia, the world considered itself to be civilized due to the system of transportation lanes like a Great Silk Road or the Great Indian Way. They stretch not only from oasis to oasis, from market to market, but also from island to island and from one port to another, as many of its routes cross the sea. Just as the nervous system connects everything in the human body, so too the Great Silk Road or the Great Inklets Road, Frankenstein's Road, for example, connects sacred sites one to another. Commerce, pilgrimage, sermon worked hand in hand. Let us mind that the trade route in antiquity and the Middle Ages played a key role in knowledge sharing. It's obvious that areas actively involved in transit trade were ahead of all the others in this connection. And on the picture you can see the Adams Peak in Sri Lanka, the place and the way of pilgrimage which is sharing by Muslim, Buddhists and Christians. It was one of the sacred places of the Maritime Silk Road. The fieldwork in Oman organized in March 27 has shown that the tomb of Ayub near Salalah, which is closely connected with the cave and spring venerated probably since the Neolithic times, was one of the oldest holy places on the route of Frankenstein's. The same could be said about the Ain al-Kasafa, Having one springs in Rustak with the modern mosque beside, I'm sure that if you organized, if the money side organized the excavations close to these warm springs, you will find the remnants of old sacred place. And let us imagine that for many centuries, the Oman was one of the starting points of such very important fruit. Today we know well about the role of Omani seafarers in the formation of transoceanic roads. The fate of Omanis have long been associated with the sea, as evidenced by ancient graffiti, by the local folklore, and the names of famous navigators such as Ahmad ibn Majid. It is well known that about 310 AD, the Arabian merchants had mastered transoceanic road, Madagascar, Ceylon, Sumatra, and at the turn of the new era founded their colony on the western coast of Sumatra. The active trade by the Malabar timber, South Arabian incense, and a little later by the African gold has led to the emergence of the Arabian merchant fleet, as well as the system of harbors at the coast of the Persian Gulf and along the African shores, including the one situated near modern Dar es Salaam and Mozambique's Beira. The Periplus of Erythraean Sea, the 1st century AD, reports that the port of Mani in the southeastern Arabia was a major center of shipbuilding, which supplied the Arab, Indian, and African trade with the ships with plank siding fastened with palm fiber. Trading activities of the Omani merchants received additional developments with the beginning of Islam. Series of new trading posts were established along the coast of East Africa. Gold, amber, sandalwood, the ebony wood, ivory, silver and iron, frankincense, cinnamon, papyrus, and the African slaves were the main trade items. The latter were transported all over the East, including Indonesia and China. The progress of Arab seafaring not only gave an opportunity to acquire control over the East African coasts and islands of the area, but also affected the East Indian Ocean trade. The west coast of the Indian subcontinent obtained a chain of trading stations with the resident Muslim population numbering in some cases up to 10,000 people in one place. The most important of these posts was Dabul, vividly described by Afanasy Nikitin, the Russian traveler of the 15th century. Oman is the maritime outpost of Arabia. It is evidenced by numbers of watchtowers neighboring the sea, by their port cities which with centuries-old history, Muscat, Kalhad, Sara, Sohar, Sur, and we see fantastic, very interesting book which was edited by Abdurrahman just here. By the excavation of the ancient port centers such as Sumkoram, Mochalim, and Al-Balid, one of the most popular ports around the 11th and 12th centuries. The area settlement dates back to 2000 BC. Both official powers and people support the research and popular scientific projects in the field and are quite enthusiastic about the result. One can also mention here the Sinbad voyage by Tim Severin, whose joint team first constructed the Sohar 26.5 meters replica of 9th century Latin-reached port and sailed Arab, and then traveled nearly 10,000 kilometers in 8 months to Canton, China, navigating by stars only. The Jebel of Muscat project by Tom Wasmer and Michael Flecker deepened our understanding of early Islamic maritime technology. Today, a small private shipyard in Sur still builds ships following the medieval technology based on the results of these works and expeditionary research. Fantastically interesting is the intent of the Megan Boat Group to learn more about the unknown elements of Bronze Age sailing from southeastern Arabia to Gujarat. As we have seen, the formation of Omani identity is a critical outcome of the process of the digest of a new species, aquatic and terrestrial. Complex of multi-level social and psychological conflicts related to adaptation to new conditions has been observed in the process of development of sea routes, of the organization of trading posts on the coast of East Africa down to the Comoros, as well on the islands of the Indian Ocean and in India. On one hand, in some cases, the traditions brought from motherland would have to be adapted to new realities. On the other, survival in new conditions damaged the preservation of group solidarity and traditions. That is why successive periods of transformation of elements of material and spiritual culture of the Omanis did not touch the basic traditions. The new reality could dictate new patterns of behavior, but not the change in basic value priorities. Every nation is in itself the particular principle which affects its social life and directs its path for centuries and defines its place among humanity. For us, Russians, this particular principle is the geography. All of our history is a product of immense territory which we obtained as a lot. These are the words of Petr Chadaev, a prominent Russian thinker, writer and philosopher who marked the Russian ethnicity as a product of vast expanses in Eurasia. For Omanis, Geohash is not only South Arabia, but the Gulf and the Indian Ocean with its island, oasis of the eastern coast of Africa and the eastern coast of Africa. Extreme natural and geographical factors that are closely associated with historical niche occupied by residents of Oman since ancient times has the greatest impact on the traditional consciousness and the economic activity of the Omanis, the traffic of Arabia with the outset of the functioning of the land and the maritime trade routes. These activities demanded from a person hard work, persistency, good health, natural curiosity and openness to the world. They had special impact on the formation of psychological resistance to the vicissitudes of the fate, persistence and endurance in everyday life. The considerable part of indigenous population in Arabia engaged in activities of appropriating nature has managed to adapt well to harsh realities of the region. In fact, they became part of nature, merged with it, but this put them inside the timeless closed system in some cases, without a clear progressive development. Actively developing new experience, the Omanis created market linkages and in many respects adopted the experiences of the people with whom they come in contact. New housing types, a special way of life has appeared on the basis of integrated and adapted to the traditional culture of Oman. Comprehensive exposure to historical and climatic factors forced the Omani consciousness to be extremely prudent in approach to the analysis of options in planning economic activities. The difference between the Omani landscapes and the inner Arabian landscapes is obvious. Oman has a whole range of natural areas, stone and sandy deserts, steppes, mountain landscapes, forests, oases, Sometimes several natural landscapes are combined in relatively limited areas. Omanis are characterized by notion of naturalness of mastering vast spaces. At the same time, the developed spaces change the worldview of the Omani, making the truly cosmic global. The best qualities of Omani were formed largely to the harsh realities of the surrounding landscapes. Not only for individuals, but ethnic groups, there is a motherland. The homeland of the ethnos is a combination of landscapes where it first developed into a new system, wrote famous Russian ethnographer and historian Lev Gumilov. Nature acts on a person compulsory, forcing to develop in a certain direction. Ethnoses that can not adapt and change must migrate to another enclosing landscape or die out. When a part of ethnos is moved to another landscape, the same changes occur with it, with equally, which usually shows a comparison of culture, social relations, the way of life of mother ethnos and ethnic groups in the new territory. Extreme factors have significantly transformed all aspects of Omani life. Omanis actively interacting with their partners in East Africa, on the islands and coasts of Indian Ocean, not only had the most active influence on the culture of their counterparts, but also created a number of original variants of Arabic cultural tradition. Just a couple of samples. Well known, first of all, symbol of Zanzibar as of the local Arabic tradition. East Africa presented many samples of Omani cultural and religious influence. Thus, in the fall of 2010, in the framework of scientific programs connected with the study of materials of the history of Islam in East Africa, stored in our museum, I managed to visit the city of Jimma, located in southwest of Ethiopia. Jimma Kaka or Jimma Abba Jifar, the only aroma state formation in the region of the Gibe River, escaped from Ethiopian coastal context. It is called so after the name of his most famous ruler, Abba Jifar I. Aroma of Jimma were Islamized between 1820 and 1817, and especially during the reign of Abba Jifar II. Once the Sultanate was closely connected with Zanzibar, Abba Jifar II, its Sultan, maintained close relations with Sultans of Zanzibar. The palace of Sultan still could be found in Jimma, unfortunately being in very poor condition. Most of the items from this palace were moved to the museum, which are unfortunately in the same pure condition. The vast majority of things, often really unique, have a Zanzibari Omani origin. Unfortunately, in a very short time, extremely poor storage conditions of these things can lead to their physical death. The collection immediately needs careful cataloging, serious study, description and publication. But the most important problem is security. Another very interesting story. I was going through the Ethiopia and see a person wearing a headdress looking very much like that Omani one. I stopped and asked, "Are you Muslim?" He said, "Yes." Then I have seen a girl who covering her hair, but her breasts were covered only with the beard. When I asked them to show me something like the Quran or something like this, I found out that something like 50 years ago they were converted into Islam. But the preacher who came probably from Oman died, and they still remember that they have covering their heads in the Muslim way. For many generations, innovation prevailing over ethnic tradition quickly acquired the form of tradition under the influence of many factors. At the same time, many properties of ethnic culture could be lost, many acquired through inter-ethnic ties on impact of the extreme environment. Priorities, norms of behaviors were formed in the specific circumstances of the struggle for survival. In such conditions, only brave, enterprising, active and risky people survived. Only those who were trying to accomplish the task of overcoming the fear of death. Lev Gumilov called such people passionaria. Passionarians are the most passionate, active, ambitious, courageous representative of an ethnos with an inner desire for action. They are people with a surplus of internal energy. And it is very interesting that this passion is much more not in the heartland, but close to the edges of the territory. We understand perfectly that Omanis are the part of the Arabic ethnos. But the factor of independence of management and use of the results of their labor became effective and distinctive for Omani. The result of their high self-sufficiency was a high level of quality of life. 1 minute. This radically changed the psychology, the stereotypes of behavior in the environment, emphasizing in a number of cases the elements of individualism, the importance of self-reliance and belief in them, formed and self-awareness. We are money, but not. And I will tell you now the thing which is very obvious to, any Russian anthropologist, that everybody among Russian anthropologists know that among the sub-ethnic groups of Russian ethnos, one can mark all Siberian residents, people who mastered the vast expanses of inner Eurasia. Pomors living in the Pomor coast of White Sea in the Arctic region, yeah? From the river Onega to Kemi, and engaged in fishing and most difficult conditions of the northern seas, coastal and maritime trade in high latitudes, as well as Cossacks, whose warlike communities were formed on the outskirts of the Moscow state and Rzeczpospolita. For the Russian anthropologists, it is obvious that Omani identity and the identity of Russian sub-ethnic groups mentioned above had a lot in common, no matter how different the historical destinies of these sub-ethnic groups were, how far they could be geographically from the inhabitants of Oman. One can add here the identity of American pioneers, people who at different periods of American history, but especially in 18th and 19th century, moved west, populating new territories. I would like to finish just with one paragraph. Now the constructivist revolution is widely discussed. According to it, the traditional mechanisms and driving forces of international development, such as state sovereignty, national interest, political confrontation of the superpowers, have become obsolete and fade into the background, giving way to identity as the leading factor of development. I'm sure that such basic elements of mental outlook as we are Muslims, Ibadi, Arabs, Omani, and having born navigators, which for centuries have provided a sound basis for the creation of Omani identity, will guarantee the upward advancement of Omani state, nation, and future. One nation obtained this globalness, it cannot lose it. And the position of Middle Eastern and Gulf Switzerland, which now obtained by Oman, is the result of this process. I'm finishing with the same citation of Sheikh Abdullah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And yes, we are being asked to be at 7 o'clock at the restaurant sharp. And so we have no time for discussions and contributions unless it's very short, and the answer is also very short. So, is there any important question?
Thank you so much for these rich presentations. I'm briefly, I want to know the importance of oral literature in Oman, and so I think that everyone can answer. I mean that poetry transmitted from generation to generation, and if in the authors that you mentioned, I'm not a specialist of Oman studies, but I'd like to know if in these authors, in poetry, in novels, in prose, etc., the role of orality on people in these these works that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. You are absolutely right to mention the oral poetry. For my research, the oral poetry is missing in my paper. I haven't come across some oral poems. I have heard that during the Portuguese colonization of Omani, have been some oral poems resisting the occupation, but I don't have. What I've got some few verses in Fasih, in pure Arabic, in pure poetry.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if we have time because we have to be in the restaurant. Thank you.
Okay.